Hello, Susan, and welcome to everybody who's watching this currently. I'm Beverley Webb, and I'm a recovery practitioner, and I specialise in adults overcoming chronic stress and particularly trauma from childhood and into adulthood. And joining me today on Don't Tell Me, Ask Me is the lovely Susan, who is a nutritionist. And I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to ask you, Susan, to introduce yourself, if you would.
Of course. Thank you, Beverley. Yeah, I'm Susan Woodward, and I am a nutritional therapist, and I specialise in supporting people with chronic exhaustive conditions, and I have a CFS reboot program that I offer to help people to navigate the whole pathway of supporting chronic fatigue syndrome.
So, Susan, there's so much we could talk about, and it's something that we're both passionate about, chronic fatigue, and we come at it from different perspectives. So you're a specialist in nutrition.
Yeah.
For those people who aren't so used to hearing about chronic fatigue syndrome, in your words, how would you describe chronic fatigue for someone who hasn't necessarily been diagnosed with it at the moment?
Yeah, I look at it as a dysfunctional autonomic nervous system condition, and it's when there is complete overwhelm in the body, and there's a up and down regulation of body systems that cause a very wide variety of symptoms throughout the body, completely unique to the individual, that can be very confusing to identify, and what makes it so difficult to get a diagnosis. It mimics many other conditions, and so many other conditions have to be ruled out before you can get a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, which is one of the frustrations, because people are often directionless for quite a while, and getting very stressed and upset about their condition, which is actually something that's feeding into the whole symptom pattern of their condition. So that's my outlook on it, is that it's an autonomic nervous system dysfunction that's going on.
And for both of us, this is our passion and our profession in different areas, and that makes us collaborative in our way of working with our clients. But we also both have lived experience from different experience, which is always, I find with my own clients, beneficial for the clients to feel that they're heard and understood.
Yeah.
So can we go back a little bit, Susan? And before you were a nutritionist, how did you come to become a nutritionist? What was your experience in the past?
Yeah, so I became a nutritionist when I became unwell. So prior to that, I had been working in the corporate arena, very stressful environment. So for decades, I worked in an environment where it was deadline, other people's deadlines that you had no control over. I was expected to work whatever hours to get projects finished, and I worked very long hours. I worked long shifts. I might work 14 days back to back. I might work through till 7 in the morning and come back in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and do another shift working through till 7 in the morning. Ridiculous hours. After about 2 decades of working like this, not all the time, but a lot of the time working like this, and really having a convenience lifestyle, because when you're working like that, you've got no time to be at home cooking nice meals and self-caring. So I also worked in an environment, pretty young, happening environment. I worked in it was people who partied a lot. So I had a work hard, play hard life. Didn't have any spiritual much in my life, anything, you know, I didn't exercise much. I just worked and played. Of course, it was just a pattern. It was just setting up a pattern of you know, just something that couldn't be sustained. And for me, my trigger point or crash point into CFS was a long haul flight to Australia. And I do that flight regularly. You can probably tell I'm Australian. And probably every year I do that trip back to Australia. And I never enjoyed flying. It's always affected me. Yeah, that was my tipping point that I associate. I was never the same person again after doing that particular flight. And I felt like I had jet lag, and it was just like this jet lag was never going. And then I just literally, I had this very rapid descent into just constant spiral of symptoms. I did the usual things that you do. You go to your GP, trying to get answers, and all the blood tests and things were coming back normal. So I was being told there's nothing wrong with you. After a sort of a month or two of this, I suddenly realized, oh gosh, I've got to try and figure this out for myself. I'm not going to get any help with this. And that was sort of the beginning of me like looking for answers. And the thing I did that just occurred to me straight away to do, because it was in my power to do, was I need to rest and I need to eat better. Those are some things that I'm in charge of. And then I had a few epiphany moments. There was a friend of mine, a friend of hers actually, had asked after me, and my friend had said, oh, she's not well, she hasn't been well for some time, she's just tired all the time. And she gave her this book to give to me, and this book changed my life. And it was a book written by an Australian naturopath. And I can't for the life of me, I think it was called Tired of Being Tired. Mm-hmm. And that book changed my life, because when I read that, it was like this, it was all about candidiasis, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, chronic exhaustive conditions. And everything I read, it was like, oh my gosh, this is me, this is me, this is me. And then when they were talking about all the things that can predispose you to having these sorts of conditions, and I'm like, yeah, I've lived that life. That's what I've done. Oh my gosh. And this isn't the way you're supposed to live. And it was just a series of realizations. And I had another epiphany moment, a strange moment. And I was sitting on a bus reading this book, and someone tapped me on the shoulder in the bus and said, I just saw you reading that book. Have you ever read a book by Patrick Holford called The Nutrition Bible? And I said, no. And I said, but I'll look at it. And that's another book that changed my life. When I read that book, it was just like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing all my life? I just have, you know, I have not been doing anything that supports my health. So these were my epiphany moments. And then I started to do some sort of courses in nutrition, and it soon was just like, this isn't enough. I know this already, and I had to do more. And that's when I decided to actually do a nutrition degree, because that was the only way I was going to be learning anything new. So yeah, and that's how I ended up studying nutrition. And this was really just looking for my own answers. Yeah. I just knew I would find my way forward if I did that. So,
and thank you, because it's always good to hear everybody's story and how they got there.
Yeah.
Because like you, I had experiences. Mine started with things such as migraine. I suffered from migraine a lot. And I remember taking my prescription to a chemist, and after a few times, the pharmacist saying to me about had I been tested for candida, you know, and talking about alternative medicines. And I won't, and I, you know, I will say that at that time when I was living such a busy life, and we, you know, work best to our deadlines, and how many times have we said that ourselves and heard other people say that I work best under pressure?
Yeah.
especially in a corporate world. And he took me aside and said, but you need to look after your stomach. Your stomach's the core. And I did hear him. However, when I went to my own mainstream doctor, although the doctor gave me time, they were quite dismissive of anything that was natural or any tests outside of the GP.
Yeah.
And quite skeptical, shall we say.
Yeah.
And I found I yo-yoed for a while until I had the biggest crash. Is that something you see quite regularly with your own clients as well?
What, that they've not had support through the established health system?
Yes, at times. Or there's as much as they want to help, there's a lack of awareness.
Yes. So I find people who are getting diagnosed now, there's a much better awareness. So if we're talking in the previous 5 years, or people have had their diagnosis a long time ago, they really struggled to get a diagnosis. And there was a long period of feeling unheard, not believed, and that, what's the word, almost to be made to feel like you're a hypochondriac.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I find now that my clients seem to be getting diagnosed pretty quickly. Of course, there is the nice guidelines that stipulate you can't get a diagnosis in the first 6 months. And I believe that's being reviewed, and I'm not sure if that has happened yet. And I think that'll be when that happens, because at the moment, doctors actually aren't allowed to, you can't get a diagnosis in the first 6 months of your symptoms. And that's one of the reasons why I had such a problem, was because I had this massive crash and this spiral of symptoms, and I was trying to get a diagnosis within, the first month.
Yeah.
And of course, people were just saying, when I was going back saying, do I have chronic fatigue syndrome? Yeah. I was getting this, oh, no, you don't have that. So because it's, so now I'm finding people are getting diagnosed earlier, quicker and earlier, but it's very individual and everyone has a different story.
Absolutely.
And I think it really depends on, the age of your GP. Have they kept up to date on, because if they still have that old mentality of yuppie flu, then that still exists out there, unfortunately, but less so now. And it is changing.
And I think we're also very much more aware of post-viral fatigue as well, which is, an important part of chronic fatigue. Would you agree?
Yes, yes. Although, I think I think it's really when it comes to post-viral fatigue, it's the tipping point for chronic fatigue syndrome rather than, yes, definitely.
Yeah. And I testament to that, as in I had meningitis. I'm very lucky to be alive and I came through it, but then it's the after effects, and they can be quite long term, and when you're very used to working to deadlines, you can push yourself and yes, I'm better now, and then it's that continual crash. And so we have an element of denial for a while before we're prepared to look internally.
I had to do a total and utter crash, and I don't think, look, I had 20 years of IBS before, and it wasn't, sometimes I'm a bit harsh on myself, but I was nearly going to say I did nothing about it. That's not true. I did try to do things about it, but because I went to my GP and, they don't really know how to support that. And it's a bit like, oh, well, at the time, I think I was offered some peppermint pills or something for it and some antispasmodics and but they're not answers, they're Band-Aids. So, and I just sort of kept on just living with my symptoms. And that's what you do, and it becomes your new norm. This is just normal for me, and it's not normal. And we're setting up this environment of dysfunction in the body that we live with then for, you know, I had IBS for 20 years.
Mm.
I no longer have IBS.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, yeah. So, yeah, it's, I think some of us, unfortunately, and particular personalities, we have to crash and before we do something about it. And you know, sometimes I get people coming to me, they're not coming to me because they think they have chronic fatigue syndrome, they're just fatigued. And
Yes.
sometimes with these people, I think, oh, you're that person who could be just, if you would really listen to me, you could be that person who might, if they just carry on, could end up crashing and having chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's trying to get people who are still over here to understand you don't want to go over there. Don't do.
Yes.
It's so much harder. It's so much easier to correct from here than it is once you crashed.
Mm.
And you know, but getting people to see that and understand that, it's very, very difficult. It's very,
Yes.
very tricky. Yeah.
And would you agree that sometimes that's because of what we believe in ourselves, and some of the messages that we hear, you know, about you know, working to stress, and that we need stress to keep us going, etc.?
I think there's a multitude of things, and you know, it's, yeah, I mean, there's it's just that, like, if that's our reality, if that's our work, they're not easy things to change and get out of. If you know, if that's our environment, it's hard to leave your job or find another career, or you know, or to say I can't work these hours anymore.
Yeah.
It's not even an option sometimes. So, and then there's definitely you know, in the corporate world, and it's to this, you know, it always really shocked me, but it was almost like a brag. I did 70-hour week, 80-hour week, and it's almost like, you know, aren't I great? And really now when I hear people say that, I just think, oh, you poor thing, you know, it's like that's, and if only companies realize that, don't work your people like that, because, you know, you want the best out of people, then, you know, make sure they have breaks, make sure, you know, that they're not working like this consistently, have enough resources, you know, so, but
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
And that's where we come on to, you know, some of the, for me, I actually see overworking as one of the coping mechanisms. And I know certainly I put my hand up, you know,
Yeah.
I've been there. It was a coping mechanism for me personally, but also when we look at sickness, you know, and what it costs businesses, it's one of the biggest costs to businesses, is long-term sickness caused by chronic stress.
Yeah.
And so in turn, it's not actually included in their financial forecasts.
Yeah. And it's not just absenteeism, but it's presenteeism. And that's just people at their desk that have forced themselves to come into work, and they're just like, oh. And, you know, they're, again, you know, you're not getting the best out of your people. So it's like, yeah.
And even though we're working differently, because we're having to be more fluid in our approach, so we might not be going into the office. You know, there's a lot of people that are working from home, but they're still working those long hours to be seen to be productive, because they're not actually being seen in the office.
And I'm finding this a lot too. And what I'm reminding people is, you're not doing an hour commute one way and an hour commute back. Like, don't work those hours. It's like, don't, you know, you're ready at 8, you know, you start at 9, you know, it's, you know, have that's your time, you know, but I see that people are still working that way.
Yeah.
And it is a mindset. It is absolutely a mindset as well. And it's just, it's indoctrinated into us that's being a good person, you know, that's great behavior to work like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when somebody first finds you or me, you know, we refer, but first finds you, you know, they're first thinking, I want to look at my nutrition, because let's be honest, that's a brilliant place to start, is looking at your nutrition, regardless of what else you want to look at. That, I always think, is a very core place to look at, because it's a bit like having a car and wanting to put the right fuel into it.
Yeah.
So when a client first comes to you, what are their steps with you?
What are their steps? Well, I have a phase program, and in the first phase, some of the things that we're going to be looking at straight away is, of course, their diet. Now, we can eat in a way that stresses our body, or we can eat in a way that nourishes our body. So I get people on a diet that is taking the stress off their system. Now, I always say to people, if you think just changing your diet is going to sort out your chronic fatigue syndrome, it's not enough. You've got to do so much more than that. But what it's going to do is turn down the flame on your symptoms. It's going to help, because when we have imbalanced blood sugar, we have what I call the blood sugar roller coaster, where we're eating the wrong foods that spike our blood sugar, and then we have a corresponding crash to the spike. And when we crash, we have certain symptoms that are fatigue, irritability, shakiness, mood change. And these are the typical symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome. So what we don't want to be doing is eating in a way that's turning up the flame on our symptoms. They're not the sole cause, but they're adding to the problem. Yeah. So that's the first thing I'm looking at, getting people to sort out their diet and eat in a way, not just that's going to help chronic fatigue syndrome, but for long-term health is going to help prevent them developing the sorts of diseases. If we look at the statistics, we're all going to end up with, you know, probably diabetes, heart disease, cancer, or, you know, Alzheimer's. So, you know, if we want to look to prevent these things, this is the way to be eating. Straight away, I want to look at nutritional deficiencies. Again, every process in the body, every biochemical function in the body requires certain nutrients to be present, what we call cofactors, for that process to happen, whether that be vitamin Z, magnesium, B vits. And if they're not present, if we don't have them in the right amounts, then that biochemical function is not going to happen, or it's not going to happen efficiently or effectively. And so when, particularly with something like chronic fatigue syndrome, we're looking at a lot of suboptimal dysfunction that we want to support. And straight away, there's some key nutrients we can look at. Some of those we can do via traditional blood tests through the GP, but they're quite limited. And the important thing to note with blood tests is the ranges that the medical profession are looking at. They're looking at pathology states. And again, we're not wanting to do that. We're wanting to look at an optimal need for nutrients, a functional need. So we look at things differently. So they're quite limited, those sorts of tests. Then we've got the whole world of functional testing, which is the sort of testing when you go through the private medical, you get that opens up more to you. And that's what sort of nutritionists and naturopaths, we use this. And it's a great way of looking at various markers in the body outside of blood. We look at urine metabolites, stools, saliva, that we can test to see a whole range of dysfunction that's happening in the body. So those are the very things that I'm looking at straight away with people. And I get people to do some little home tests that help me look at their thyroid function, their stomach acid production, and they just give me a bigger picture too into what's happening. And then very early on, I'm also getting people to look at developing healthy patterns in their lifestyle. We need to start rewiring the brain. If we've got a lot of hormonal imbalance, transmitter imbalance, we need to start, if our circadian rhythms are out of whack, which most people with chronic fatigue syndrome, we're absolutely wiped out in the morning, and if we've ever got energy, it tends to be later on, more likely later on in the day, because our circadian rhythms are back to front. Yes. So we need to start rewiring our brain through daily habits that we practice over and over and over to get these bad patterns out. So that's very, very early days what I'm looking at, and giving people a structure, I think, too, that helps them get out of their anxiety pattern of what's wrong with me,
Yes.
how do I get well, how long will I be well, no one can tell me anything. And it's just sort of explaining to people why you have so many why this autonomic nervous system dysfunction causes all these symptoms. Once people can understand, have some understanding, and that, you know, you're on this slow sort of gradual path of improving symptoms, then I think that helps take some of the anxiety pattern out for people.
Absolutely.
And looking at sleep, improving sleep quality from early on, because sleep is our time the body heals.
Yes.
And that is very important to try and improve quality, getting to sleep and how long we can stay asleep. I'm not saying you're going to wake up feeling refreshed, but just making sure you are getting to sleep and staying asleep.
And all these things, Susan, are important, because when you're feeling chronic fatigued, stressed, overwhelmed, you can feel very powerless. Yeah. So to be working with you, looking at, you know, your diet, also acknowledging what's happening in your own body.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you know, as we both know, our own bodies can be trying to talk to us and communicate with us, but we're not listening.
Every symptom
it's normal.
Is our body communicating with us. Every ache, pain, whatever. And that's what we have lost in the West. We don't listen to our bodies anymore. We don't have time to, you know, when are we not scrolling on our phones, or, you know, when do we ever internalize and listen to our bodies? So, and some people are great at self-care, and I was someone who never self-cared, and, you know, we're the ones who are likely to get these sorts of things. So some people are good at it, comes to them naturally. The rest of us, you know, we have to learn to self-care. And this is another thing. I look very much into the personalities. There is a personality profile of the type of person who gets chronic fatigue syndrome. They are a type A personality. Yes. They are an overachiever, driven, perfectionist, or anxiety trauma profile, or overhelper. This is your classic person who gets chronic fatigue syndrome, ME.
Yes.
It's not the kind of really chilled, laid-back person who never worries about a thing. They're not the ones who typically get chronic fatigue syndrome. It's the worriers, the over-processors, overthinkers, to-do lists. To start to understand who we are, and, you know, that's great. We're all fabulously unique. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We just need to start to have awareness of who we are, and to just go, hang on a minute, I've got to stop doing that behavior that's just so natural to me. It doesn't serve me anymore.
Absolutely. And that's where I'm very much in the relationship with self and the emotions, because we tend to separate our physical and our mental or neurological or our emotional being, but actually they're very much intertwined. And I know for myself and hearing others in the corporate world, you know, it's about not being emotive, you know, getting on with it, and we become very much in the head, whereas actually as human beings we are emotive, and it's okay to switch off for a while, but if we do anything that becomes out of balance, our whole body becomes out of balance. And it's also listening to the outside messages. You know, I don't know about you, but when I see things written about healthy, and they're you know, a microwave meal that's being described as healthy and balanced, and I want to shudder because it's processed, and it's not healthy or balanced, but we're being told it is.
There's a lot of messages out there that are definitely wrong. And look, you know, that's the beauty of seeing, you know, a nutritional therapist, is you can just cut through all of that. What is healthy? And it's not, you know, what's healthy for one person isn't necessarily healthy for another. Absolutely. If you have, you know, broccoli can be wrong for somebody who's got sluggish thyroid function. You know, it's you know, it depends on what's happening you know, in you. So there's just so much information out there that's based on a bit of truth, but it doesn't apply to everybody, no. Yeah, there's a lot of missed messages out there.
So Susan, for you, going back to yourself, because it's always nice to get to know people as well, because often as well, when you're a professional, it's good to see the other side, because that's what makes you unique. Yeah. So before we finish, I'd like to find out a little bit more about your hobbies and what you like to do, Susan, and what you now embrace and encourage being part of your life.
Yeah, so look, one of the things that I think getting chronic fatigue syndrome is it just shook up my priorities. And I now do the things I love. And I didn't used to do them before because my friends didn't like them doing them, my partners didn't. And, you know, I can remember like when I had no energy whatsoever, just thinking, oh, I always wanted to do walking in the Swiss Alps. I wanted to start playing tennis again. I was like craving physical activities that I was wondering, will I ever be able to do these things again? And so for me, as my energy started to return, I started taking tennis lessons. I hadn't picked up a racket probably since I was about 12. I just thought, I love tennis, I'm going to play again. I do lots and lots of hiking. The thing for me I've realized is my spiritual place is nature. The benefit I get from being in nature, there's nothing else like it. And yes, going to a park's great if that's all we've got when we live in. I live in North London, and I'm so lucky I've got the Heath near me. But you know, there's nothing like being really out in the countryside. And the kick I get from, I call it vitamin N, and it's, you know, it's just nothing like nature. And I will be, if I do a, you know, if I go do a 8-mile hike now, you know, I will feel the benefit of that. Literally, I'm on a high from that for possibly a week afterwards.
Yeah.
So those are and travel has always been something I've been passionate about. So those are my key things. And this summer I started, I learned to row.
Oh, wow.
Not rowing, no, when you do both yourself, sculling.
Ooh, okay.
Where you put a boat on your own and you have the two walls. That's sculling. And that was fantastic. So that was my skill for this year. So those are the things that I love to do. The things that I got such a fright and thought, am I ever going to be able to do those things again? Those are the things that I love to invest my time in, and that I get the most enjoyment from.
And one of the things I very much enjoy is walking, because what I find as well, I can listen to my body.
Yeah.
So when I go out and I get outside, it's okay, where do I feel like going today? How long do I feel like going? But not putting the pressure on myself, because I remember being an A-type, being in the gym, rushing to get to the gym to do a class, and watching the clock, because I didn't really want to be in the gym. I just felt I should to keep fit. And I was back there in the 80s doing all those classes, whereas now yoga and walking. But what is nice is to be able to acknowledge what's right for me and take that pressure off. And some days it may only be a 20-minute walk, and other days
absolutely
I don't want to actually come home. I'm still walking hours later, and I think that's what's lovely. Well, thank you, Susan. For anyone listening to us today, yes, I will be putting up contact details anyway, but would you just like to let everybody know how to contact you if they're interested in speaking with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website, which is www.replenishyourlife.co.uk, and it's lots of information on there about me, my program, and you can book a 15-minute, half-hour complimentary discovery call, just to chat through your situation.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Susan. And It's been a pleasure having you on Don't Tell Me, Ask Me.
Oh, it's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure to speak with you. Thank you, Beverley.